Today, only one human species remains on Earth. Our name is Homo sapiens, the wise human. We build cities, write histories, and launch spacecraft into the cosmos. Look around. There is no one else like us. No other human species to compare or coexist with. But that was never nature's default. 300,000 years ago, we were not alone. At that time, this planet was home to multiple human species, walking the earth, hunting, making fire, and surviving in their own ways. The list includes Homo neanderthalensis, a robust human species in Europe and Western Asia. They had thick bones, powerful physiques, and expert hunting skills adapted to cold environments. Denisovans, close relatives of Neanderthals living in Asia. Though no complete skeleton has ever been found, their DNA is clearly present in modern people from Melanesia, Tibet, and Southeast Asia. Homo erectus, one of the most successful human species, living from Africa to Indonesia for nearly 2 million years. They were the first to leave Africa, control fire, and craft symmetrical stone tools. Homo floresiensis, a tiny human species discovered on Flores Island, Indonesia. Standing about 1 meter tall with small brains, they still made tools and hunted animals larger than themselves. Homo luzonensis, a recently discovered species in Calao Cave, Philippines. Their bones show a unique mix of ancient and modern traits, suggesting isolated evolution on island terrain. Homo naledi, another evolutionary branch in South Africa, with a skeletal structure combining primitive and modern features. Although they lived around 250,000 years ago, they may have performed burial rituals, once thought exclusive to Homo sapiens. These are not just theories, but confirmed archaeological realities. Bones, teeth, stone tools, genetic traces, all paint a picture far more complex than the simple idea that we were always the only ones. In truth, Homo sapiens was just one branch in the human forest, a forest where multiple species evolved in parallel, sometimes interbreeding, sometimes competing, sometimes disappearing without a trace. The concept of human was never a single line. It was a multi-dimensional evolutionary ecosystem where many intelligent beings coexisted, and that raises a profound question. What happened to them? Neanderthals vanished. Denisovans, only their DNA remains. Erectus, extinct. The tiny humans of Flores and Luzon, none survived. Homo naledi, still a mystery buried beneath the ground, and yet we remain. Why? Were we truly superior or just fortunate? Was there something in the way we built communities, shared knowledge, or adapted to changing climates that gave Homo sapiens the final edge? Or was it our ability to absorb, mix with, and inherit from other species that allowed us to endure? Archaeology, genetics, anthropology, and paleontology are beginning to provide answers. Yet with each new discovery, the questions grow deeper. Perhaps to understand who we are, we must first accept a truth. Humanity was never singular. We are the remnant of a world that was once crowded, diverse, and full of surprises. A world where the others also lived, dreamed, and made their own histories. Part 2. The Hunters in the Shadows. Homo neanderthalensis. For most of their existence, Homo sapiens were not the only human species walking the earth. One of the most prominent co-inhabitants was Homo neanderthalensis, commonly known as the Neanderthal. They appeared around 400,000 years ago and vanished approximately 40,000 years ago. For hundreds of millennia, they were a dominant human species across Europe and Western Asia, adapting to harsh Ice Age climates and rugged terrains. But they were not primitive brutes, as once thought. They were humans, just not our kind. Physical adaptation and intelligence. Neanderthals were biologically distinct. They had broad chests, powerful limbs, and robust bones built for endurance and strength. Their skulls were larger than ours, housing brains that, on average, were slightly bigger than those of modern humans. Their physical features were shaped by survival in cold environments. A shorter stature, wide noses, and stocky builds reduced heat loss. This wasn't random. It was evolution, fine-tuning their bodies to endure glacial Europe. Yet, strength was not their only asset. Archaeological findings reveal that Neanderthals were skilled toolmakers. They developed and refined the Mousterian toolkit, a technological tradition characterized by precisely crafted flake tools, spearheads, scrapers, and points made from stone. They hunted large game cooperatively: bison, reindeer, mammoths. This required planning, communication, and social coordination. They lived in small bands, likely based around kinship, moving with the herds and seasons. But perhaps most striking is the evidence of burials. At sites like Shanidar Cave in Iraq and La Chapelle aux Saints in France, Neanderthal skeletons were found carefully laid in the ground, sometimes surrounded by objects or flower pollen. Whether or not this was symbolic remains debated, but it proves one thing: they cared for their dead. Genetic legacy. In 2010, the Neanderthal genome was sequenced. The results rewrote our understanding of human ancestry. It turns out modern humans outside Africa carry between 1% and 4% Neanderthal DNA. This means interbreeding occurred, not once, but multiple times between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Some of those hybrid children lived, reproduced, and passed on their genes. Today, traits inherited from Neanderthals affect our immune systems, our response to viruses, and even how we process fat and sunlight. In other words, Neanderthals are not just extinct relatives, they are part of us. Competition and contact. The interaction between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens was complex. The first known contact likely occurred around 60,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens expanded out of Africa into the Levant and Europe. We know there was interbreeding, but also competition. The two species likely competed for territory, prey, and resources, especially in regions like southern Europe, where ecological niches overlapped. Neanderthals had been thriving for hundreds of thousands of years, but Homo sapiens arrived with a different toolkit: symbolic language capable of sharing abstract ideas, cultural flexibility allowing rapid innovation and adaptation, wider social networks enabling cooperation across larger groups. These advantages made Homo sapiens more resilient during times of change. When climates fluctuated or food sources moved, Homo sapiens could adjust faster. Neanderthals, despite their strength and intelligence, may have been less flexible in the face of rapid environmental and social shifts. A vanishing species. By around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals were gone. There's no evidence of mass violence, no sudden catastrophe. Instead, they appear to have disappeared gradually, over a few thousand years. Their numbers dwindled, their groups grew isolated, and their cultural traditions faded. Perhaps some were absorbed into Homo sapiens populations. Others may have died out due to disease, inbreeding, or environmental pressure. But they did not vanish entirely. They remain in our bones. They live in our immune systems. They echo in our genes. What if they had survived? What if instead of one species, multiple human species had endured into the modern age? Would we view ourselves differently? Less as the pinnacle of evolution, and more as one branch among many? Would we have lived alongside them, cooperated, coexisted, or continued to compete? It's impossible to say, but the fossil record offers a lesson. Homo sapiens did not conquer alone. We emerged from a world already full of intelligent, social, capable humans. Some, like the Neanderthals, may have been more like us than we're comfortable admitting. In the shadows of prehistory, they hunted, laughed, raised children, and buried their dead. Not as myths, but as people. Art 3. Ghost lineages, Denisovans, erectus, and the island species. When discussing the history of human evolution, certain species dominate the narrative: Homo sapiens, Neanderthals. But behind the well-known names lies a deeper and less visible story. A story shaped by species whose remains are rare, whose faces are unknown, but whose DNA still runs in human blood. These are the ghost lineages. They left almost no bones, but they left a legacy. The Denisovans, humans without a face. The the Denisovans are perhaps the most enigmatic of all extinct human species. They were first identified in 2010, not from a skeleton, but from a fragment, a finger bone discovered in the Denisova cave in Siberia. From that sliver of bone, scientists extracted ancient DNA. What they found was surprising. The genome did not match that of Neanderthals or modern humans. It belonged to a distinct human lineage, one that had coexisted and interbred with both. To this day, only a handful of physical remains have been found. A molar tooth, a partial jawbone from the Tibetan plateau, some scattered bone fragments. That's it. No skull, no postcranial skeleton. We don't know what Denisovans looked like, but we know what they left behind. Genetic studies show that modern populations in Melanesia, Papua New Guinea, Australia, and parts of Southeast Asia carry up to 5% Denisovan DNA. They also contributed key genetic adaptations. One of the most famous is the EPAS1 gene variant, which enables Tibetan populations to thrive at high altitudes by improving oxygen transport. This means Denisovans weren't just some fringe species. They were widespread, influential, and deeply embedded in the story of our ancestry, despite being almost invisible in the fossil record. Homo erectus, the veteran ancestor, before the Denisovans, before Neanderthals, before Homo sapiens, there was Homo erectus. They first appeared nearly 1.9 million years ago in Africa. And for over 1.5 million years, they survived across vast regions, from the African savannas to the volcanic landscapes of Indonesia and the steppes of China. They were the first human species to leave Africa, marking the beginning of global migration. They mastered fire. They made symmetrical hand axes and bifaces, part of what archaeologists call the Acheulean tool tradition. Their brains were smaller than ours, but significantly larger than those of earlier hominins. They likely lived in social groups, communicated, hunted cooperatively, and perhaps even cared for their injured. Homo erectus is remarkable not only for its achievements, but for its longevity. No other human species existed for so long. They were the survivors, enduring multiple climate shifts, adapting to diverse environments, and laying the technological and behavioral groundwork for future human evolution. They went extinct around 110,000 years ago, but their legacy shaped the path of Homo sapiens, both genetically and culturally. Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis, island survivors. Evolution does not always move in a straight line. It does not always produce taller, smarter, or stronger beings. Sometimes, survival favors small, agile bodies, especially in isolation. On the remote island of Flores, Indonesia, scientists discovered Homo floresiensis, a tiny human species standing just over 1 meter tall, with brains no larger than a chimpanzee's. Nicknamed the Hobbit humans, they lived until about 50,000 years ago, overlapping with Homo sapiens and potentially even encountering them. Despite their size, Homo floresiensis made stone tools, hunted dwarf elephants, and likely used fire. Their small stature is thought to be an example of island dwarfism, an evolutionary response to limited resources and isolation. Further north, in the Philippines, another diminutive species was identified, Homo luzonensis. Found in Calao Cave, their bones show a mosaic of traits, some primitive, some more derived. They too were small, likely under 1.2 meters in height, and lived over 67,000 years ago. These island species challenge our assumptions. They prove that intelligence and survival are not solely functions of brain size or body mass, but of adaptation and ecological fit. Homo naledi, the cave mystery. In 2013, deep inside the Rising Star cave system in South Africa, paleoanthropologists made a puzzling discovery. Thousands of fossilized bones belonging to a species no one had seen before. Named Homo naledi, this species exhibited a striking combination of traits. Their skulls were small, their brains about 1/3 the size of ours. Their hands and feet suggested they were capable of tool use and upright walking. but also good climbers. Their pelvis and shoulders retained primitive features, more typical of earlier hominins. But what stunned scientists was the context. The bones were found deep within a cave, in a chamber so hard to access that it took experienced cavers and months of effort to reach. There were no signs of predator activity or water transport. The most plausible explanation? They deliberately placed their dead there. If true, this suggests some form of ritualized behavior where symbolic thought performed by a species with a brain no larger than an orange. This raises fundamental questions. What does it mean to be human? Is intelligence only a matter of brain volume? And how many other cognitive lineages have we lost? These species, Denisovans, erectus, Floresiensis, luzonensis, naledi, form the hidden branches of our family tree. Some lived in caves, some on mountaintops, some on islands. Most vanished without leaving a clear face behind. But they all left footprints in our biology and clues in stone. They are not side stories. They are not failed experiments. They are part of what made us possible. The history of humanity is not a ladder. It is a forest, twisting, branching, and full of shadows. And in those shadows, other humans once lived. Part 4. Interbreeding, competition, and absorption. Human evolution was not a clean break from the past. It was a process of entanglement, of gene flow, coexistence, and gradual absorption. Modern humans did not simply replace other species. We interacted with them, competed with them, and in some cases, merged with them. The legacy of those encounters is still present, hidden within the human genome. Genetic exchange. One of the most significant revelations of 21st century science came not from fossils, but from DNA. By sequencing ancient genomes, researchers discovered that Homo sapiens interbred with other human species, not once, but repeatedly. Neanderthals. Virtually all non-African humans today carry between 2 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. This genetic material affects immune response, skin adaptation, and even how we metabolize fats. Denisovans, populations in Southeast Asia, Papua New Guinea, and Melanesia have inherited up to 5% Denisovan DNA. This includes genes that help people adapt to high altitudes, such as the EPS1 variant found in Tibetan populations. These are not isolated findings. In Siberia, at Denisova Cave, a bone fragment was identified as belonging to a first-generation hybrid, a young female whose mother was Neanderthal and father was Denisovan. At Ust Ishim, a Homo sapiens femur, dated to 45,000 years ago, contains long segments of Neanderthal DNA, showing that the interbreeding had occurred recently. Near Lake Baikal, researchers found an individual with mixed ancestry from all three species: Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. This was not occasional, it was widespread. Human species overlapped not only in space, but in genes, competition, and integration. But gene flow was only one part of the story. Coexistence also meant competition. When Homo sapiens spread into Eurasia, they entered territories already occupied by Neanderthals and Denisovans. The ecological overlap created tension over hunting grounds, water sources, and shelter. In that context, Homo sapiens had key advantages. Cognitive flexibility. Homo sapiens developed symbolic language, storytelling, and long-term planning. This allowed us to organize larger groups, build alliances, and transmit knowledge across generations. Cultural adaptability. Unlike other species that had stable but localized toolkits, Homo sapiens adapted tools and clothing based on environment. We refined projectile weapons, made tailored clothing, and created symbolic art. These were not aesthetic choices, they were survival strategies. Social structure. Our ability to build networks of trust beyond the immediate family meant that Homo sapiens could form bands, tribes, and eventually complex societies. In contrast, Neanderthals, though intelligent and skilled, appear to have lived in smaller, more isolated groups. They may have lacked the broader social cohesion needed during times of environmental stress. These differences may have tilted the balance. Homo sapiens didn't necessarily outfight other humans. We out-cooperated them. Disappearance and absorption. Between 50,000 and 30,000 years ago, many archaic human species began to vanish. Neanderthals disappeared from Europe and the Middle East. Denisovans left behind only traces in DNA. Homo erectus faded from Southeast Asia. Island species like Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis ceased to appear in the archaeological record. But the end wasn't marked by war or extinction events. There are no signs of widespread conflict. Instead, what the data suggests is gradual absorption. Some populations may have died out. Others may have interbred with Homo sapiens to the point of genetic dilution. Over time, their unique lineages dissolved into a broader human ancestry. This process wasn't uniform or deliberate. It was evolution, shaped by climate, migration, disease, and demography. And it raises a fundamental question. Did Homo sapiens survive because we were biologically superior? Or were we simply in the right place at the right time, with the right tools to adapt? Was our survival a product of natural selection or historical contingency? There is no simple answer. A different kind of victory. In traditional narratives, Homo sapiens are portrayed as the ultimate winners, the last humans standing. But that framing is misleading. We did not simply win. We inherited, we absorbed, we became the composite of those who came before us. Every human alive today carries the imprint of other species. Their genes influence our health, behavior, and biology. Their tools influenced our technologies. Their survival strategies shaped our evolution. In that sense, their extinction was not absolute. It was transformation. The history of our species is not a tale of isolation, but of integration. We are not the sole heirs of humanity. We are the convergence of many human stories. Art 5. Who are we in the human forest? The story of Homo sapiens is often told as a linear triumph. We emerged, we advanced, and we dominated. But the evidence tells a far more complex story, one that does not begin with supremacy, but with entanglement. We did not appear in isolation. We did not evolve in a vacuum. We were never alone. A mosaic, not a monolith. Genetic studies, fossil discoveries, and archaeological data now make it clear. Homo sapiens is not a pure species. We are the product of contact, mixture, and survival across many lineages. Our genome is not a single melody. It is a composition, assembled from the fragments of others. We carry Neanderthal DNA. We carry Denisovan genes. We carry traces of other archaic hominins, some of whom have left no fossils at all. These genetic signatures are not trivial. They have practical consequences. Immunity. Genes inherited from Neanderthals and Denisovans play roles in our immune response to viruses and pathogens. Altitude adaptation. The EPAS1 gene from Denisovans allows certain modern populations to thrive in low-oxygen environments. Metabolism and brain development. Archaic DNA influences fat storage, glucose regulation, and even neurological pathways. These traits were not invented by Homo sapiens. They were acquired through interaction, adaptation, and inheritance. What we consider modern human biology is in many ways an evolutionary collaboration, behavioral inheritance. But it's not only our biology that holds traces of the others. Some of our deep instincts and social behaviors may also descend from a shared evolutionary past. Fear of the dark, likely a survival reflex inherited from ancestors who lived in predator-rich environments. Group cohesion, the impulse to gather, share food, and form alliances, predates modern Homo sapiens. Division of labor and childcare sharing, seen even in Neanderthal evidence, suggest a long evolutionary history of cooperative living. Tool use, fire management, and symbolic thought existed in multiple species, not just our own. Even the foundations of storytelling, memory, and ritual may have older roots than previously believed. These behaviors were not invented by us. They were refined through a continuum of human evolution, a wider definition of human. If multiple species of humans once walked the earth, each with intelligence, society, and survival strategies, then we must confront a philosophical question. What does it mean to be human? For centuries, the term human has been implicitly reserved for Homo sapiens, but that boundary is artificial. Neanderthals made tools, buried their dead, and likely had symbolic communication. Denisovans left behind genetic gifts that enhanced our survival. Homo erectus endured for nearly 2 million years, spreading across continents. Even Homo naledi, with its small brain, may have practiced mortuary behavior. These species were not lesser. They were different expressions of what it meant to be human, shaped by their environments, their challenges, and their evolutionary paths. Perhaps we are not the final word in the human story. Perhaps we are simply its most recent chapter, a shared legacy. The disappearance of other human species was not a clean extinction. It was a blending, a fading into us. Their genes did not vanish. Their instincts were not erased. Their behaviors, some visible, some hidden, are stitched into the fabric of our existence. We may not remember their names or recognize their faces, but we carry their legacy in our cells, our fears, our strengths, and our social bonds. To speak of Homo sapiens today is to speak of many species folded into one. Closing thought. We often imagine that they were the others, separate, primitive, extinct, but this view is outdated and inaccurate. They are not simply chapters that ended. They are pages within us. Their disappearance was not total. It was transformation. They are not just ancestors, they are components of who we are. The human forest was once vast, filled with diverse species, each adapted to their niche, each contributing to the broader experiment of what it meant to be human. That forest has thinned, but its roots remain in us. We are not alone in our story. We are the sum of many stories. We are not the end of human evolution, only the parts still being written.